Welcome to the Weekend Sports Cars and the Marshall Pruett podcast, presented by Cooper Tires, supported by PNC Bank. My dear friend Graham Goodwin, we are starting off this episode, I think, where it belongs, and that is with heavy hearts, very heavy hearts, about the losses of a young man who we barely knew, but had definitely in our thoughts, and an older gentleman who many of us knew very well and was deeply embedded in our hearts. And we also have, we'll actually start off with a little piece of positive news. But before we get started, how are things in your world late in the UK on a Tuesday night, September 11th?
Good afternoon, good evening from anybody around the UK, and good day to all. It's, as with you, MP, been an extremely busy day for the saddest of reasons. But not a lot of racing around these parts the last few days. Boy, has this kept the email and the phone lines buzzing, and that will go on well into the next 24 hours with some more significant people who want to catch up and want to give some of their memories of the man we're going to talk about in just a few moments.
Yeah, so we'll mention that poor young Caleb Hammond, who was not given long to live. You might have read that he asked for folks to send racing stickers because that is what he wanted to adorn his casket, which, if you aren't, that's a little bit too real and too raw, at least for me. Young Caleb has passed on. That incredibly sad to hear. And then waking up this morning to learn that Dr. Donald Panoz has died at 83, been fighting pancreatic cancer. Very, I guess you could say, rapid onset of this. We'll get into some remembrances of the good doctor here momentarily. PNC is proud to sponsor Scott Dixon, driver of the number 9 car for Chip Ganassi Racing. Everyone tunes in on race day, but so much of the race is determined off camera during the work put in throughout the week, month, and year. From the gym to the practice track, Scott Dixon and the team take small steps every day to get closer to victory lane. Copyright 2018, the PNC Financial Services Group Incorporated. All rights reserved. PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC. Wanted to start off with something a little bit positive, though, to try and weigh some of the sadness, and that being the learning that Sheena Monk, who many of us, either for those of us who were at WeatherTech Raceway Laguna Seca last weekend when she had her, oh my goodness, crash atop the corkscrew and feared for her health and safety, learned today from her team owner, Wayne Taylor, who said, I called her, expected to, hear her in a quiet place in the hospital, and heard the sounds of engines, and said, what's going on? She said, I'm driving down the Pacific Coast Highway, or I'm riding down the Pacific Coast Highway in the passenger seat, I'm going home. And to which he said, what? And apparently Sheena was released, which, while there was some information provided, Graham, about her general state, there really were no details given as to whether she had broken bones or this or that. Again, fear, looking at the crash, definite fear that some serious internal injuries or broken bones might have taken place. I don't know if there's any of that in place. But I do know that she's doing well enough that she is, I think, still currently driving home towards Southern California. And Wayne said that, unfortunately, her car was written off, but they are searching for a replacement for her to drive approximately 2 months now at the Lamborghini World Finals in Vallelunga. So, amen to that. Let's talk about that first, and then we got some other information that a lot of us have been waiting to get to the heart of. But holy cow, she's driving home, man.
Look, the footage of the accident was extraordinary. If you've not seen it, there's plenty of places you can find that online. The car, barely impeded speed, wasn't it, across the gravel trap to the outside of the corkscrew, and heavy impact with the tyres to the outside of the car. pitched up into the air and came back mercifully on its wheels, but staggering. I mean, we said this before. It's worth saying it again. We are perhaps a little too used to people walking away from serious accidents nowadays, but that did look like one that there was going to be rather worse news from. That is, whatever the injuries are, for Sheena to have been released from the care of the hospital has to imply at least that whatever injuries she does have would be regarded as being relatively minor, and certainly, healable within what you're telling me, MP, is a 8-week period. That's pretty remarkable from the pictures we saw.
And what we learned about the source of the crash, I'll admit, I cannot say with complete authority. I am sure if I were to go back and look through my histories on the tweeters and the book faces that I've probably reacted to something that I shouldn't have, or made some statement about knowing something actually happened when I didn't have all the facts. So I'm trying not to sound too judgy. I'll also be very honest in saying when Lamborghini came out with their statement, I believe it was the following day after the crash, stating that based on their analysis, all systems were fully functional at the time of the crash. It was met by two mostly popular responses. Not saying everyone responded this way, but fairly common responses. One being, too soon. This is a bad look for Lamborghini. They're rushing out to say it wasn't their fault. Give her time to heal. We don't even know what condition she's in. I would say that that's a very modern reaction, I believe, that I've witnessed. Keep in mind that Lamborghini is a large, very well-known international business, and that although this was a motor race, and we're not talking true road vehicles being involved in a road crash, any suggestion that there was a grand failure to cause a crash that was going to go viral due to its violence and the visuals of it, there should have been no surprise that Lamborghini was going to inspect, and provided there was no fault found, let the world know, hey, there isn't some defect with our car or cars. Any large company, whether it's automobiles, soft drinks, I don't care what, any significant company will do the same and will always do the same because they have a much bigger thing to protect, and that's their company. And anything that not responding as quickly as possible, letting that get out of control. So while I understand there's some who saw the sensitivity of getting this out as quickly as they did as being ill-timed or harsh or mean or otherwise, I just think we need to realize that this is a big company that needs to get out in front of something, which they did. The other reaction was total BS. This is a CYA scenario. Cover your ass. This is right, sure it was. Clearly it was a brake failure. Or, clearly it was a stuck throttle. And,
wouldn't be the smartest of moves for a corporate entity to do that, would it?
No. And, look, I'm not I'm not saying we've always received 100% truthful and accurate press releases from auto manufacturers when it comes to problems that have been had or otherwise. But I would say, since we had the highly visual nature of this crash, one that went around the world very quickly via social media, if Lamborghini were to lie, they would be setting themselves up for a lot of problems. You could also hint, Graham, that this release might not have gone out without Sheena Monk at least being aware of what it was going to say. In what I learned today, the source of the crash was driver error. And not driver error as in Sheena Monk is a poor driver. Not at all. She's very good. The guy talking right now has also crashed heavily and is currently carrying and will carry for the rest of his life fractured bones in his right wrist from a crash in a open-wheel car at a very dangerous track that was based solely on my own negligence.
Yep, done it myself. I'll put my hand up and say fractured my neck in a very careless incident with a competition vehicle, a kart, many years ago.
What I've learned, this was a case of traffic at the top of the hill. She was trying to go around. In trying to deal with what was going on in front of her, getting back onto the throttle to trying to reaccelerate up closer to the, I guess what you would call the regular braking and turn-in point. And in that entire interaction of trying to get around cars, braking timing being off, then going to get back onto throttle, her foot basically got wedged in place, had full throttle applied, and she was unable to extract her foot before the crash, to prevent the crash from happening. So the reason that we saw the car shoot across the top of the corkscrew and crash, this is coming from outside the company, people who don't have anything to cover or any reason to share a falsehood, said, look, it was a simple case of a driver getting their foot stuck and unable to pull it back in time to hit the brake or slow down to prevent a crash. So that's that. Nothing criminal, nothing sinister, just, hey, as a guy who kept his foot on the throttle way too long going up towards turn 2, what we now call Sonoma Raceway, and getting onto the marbles and crashing his Formula Ford head on into the tires on my own in qualifying, I can tell you that required no talent, which I proved to the world I possessed. This was just again, from what I am told by an impeccable source, a case of a driver getting their foot caught and unable to get it back in time to slow the car. And in that case, all of the, it was brakes, it was stuck throttle mechanically, there was some malfunction-based crash. No, it appears to be just a driver having a very bad interaction at the corkscrew. But
unlucky.
Who, in theory, will be racing again in 2 months, and we can put all of this behind us. But it sounds like what Lamborghini put out did not deserve all of the heavy pushback that was provided.
We've seen it before. I've seen it before multiple times, I have to say, a not dissimilar incident. And in some instances, they've managed to the driver concerned has managed to deal with the issue before the worst happened. The one I can remember, MP, you may remember this, back in the day when we had the FI GT1 World Championship, Yas Marina, an early race in that series. I'm trying to recall which of the three drivers it was. I think it was Natasha Gashnang, Swiss driver, who is let me get this right, it's Natasha, the cousin of Sebastian Buemi, I think she is. And in her case, it was a Maytech Ford GT1. And again, I think thought that she was applying full brake, but because there'd been a misjudgment, whether or not the foot was wedged, I don't know in this instance, but was actually applying full brake and full throttle at the same time. And I'm afraid in that instance, the throttle overcame the braking abilities of the car, and it was another very heavy frontal impact. Do you know what matters here? What matters here is she's in the car on the way home. And at the moment, nothing else. But maybe there is a lesson here for those that would choose to put opinion ahead of fact in a kind of rather too quick to jump the gun sort of way on the internet. It's an internet thing, isn't it?
He's a gun jumper. All right.
There is one other little piece of housekeeping, by the way, before we get to the major story, and that is we have a couple of questions, because yet again, and I think it's going to carry on this way, your questions are going to define the direction of this show and its future shows. We've got a question that relates in part to an interview you did fairly recently with a young driver, but relates to, uniquely on the Week in Sports Cars, motorcycling. Man called Romano Fenati. Now, if you've not seen the footage of involving Romano Fenati, this happened at the weekend in the Moto2 race, and at something like 140 miles an hour on the straight, after a bit of a tete-a-tete with another racer earlier in the event, Mr. Fenati leant over and applied the brake on his opponent's bike. Yeah.
I mean, two things. I've always wondered why that doesn't happen more often in motorcycle racing, because where else are the controls something you can readily grab and manipulate on your competitor's car? Yeah.
Done with a mirror. Done with a mirror on a Mazda Miata in the UK. But it's not the first time he's done something like this. There is a video, I think, doing the rounds of him having a bit of a contretemps with another racer during practice, during which he hits the kill switch on the bike.
Oh, brilliant.
But where are we with this? I'll tell you exactly where I am. He got a 2-race ban and was later dropped from the team. I can tell you the news this evening is that he's had his licence revoked by his national governing body and has retired from the sport. Has gone back to education this evening. Frankly, 2 races. For that, the governing body needs a fat slap, I'm afraid. Absolutely outrageous. I firmly agree, by the way, with the principle that you established with your earlier interview, MP, which is we're all allowed to make a mistake, however large that mistake is. And yes, there should be consequences, but after that, you know, you've done the time and away you come. And we've got other good examples of that, the likes of Dan Ticktum, who was involved in single-seater racing in the UK with a dreadful example of exacting revenge upon an opponent under a safety car in this instance. Served his time, has come back, and now looks to have a decent future ahead of him. We all do get another chance. However, when you've got to the stage where there is repeat behaviour of this sort going on, then at some point you've got to call time. I think the body of evidence from those that know this side of the sport better than I do is this isn't first, the second, or even the third time that we've had extreme behaviour from this young man, and I think we've got a sport that can do without it. I
would say that the greatest penalty needs to be applied to the MotoGP 2 series or the Moto 2 series for insufficient reaction in applying a penalty. That is, I'm not one of the folks who believes that every athlete, every thing involved in sport is a genuine role model and that their actions are going to just set future policy by the youth who follow in their footsteps. But I do believe that when someone does something like that and you apply such a almost throwaway penalty, this is a type of action that needs a statement to be made. Nothing less than a major statement. And so this to me is a 1-year ban, if not 2, something that says we're going to send a global message, not to you. You've already chosen your fate. You knew what you were doing, and so you don't be surprised. But this is for everyone else to know. If you are on a motorcycle, even if you're riding in a car, and a passenger can reach out and grab the brake or something on a motorcycle, let's just not give this any credence, and let's show how serious that we take this. That did not happen, which is incredibly sad. Let's, Graham, go to our friend Dr. Don Panoz, who, in the timing of things and the amount of questions, unfortunately, in processing obituaries and the many, many folks that we spoke with to do a reaction piece, didn't really coincide with our normal requests for Q&A. Frankly, we had the majority of our Q&A already in place and did not receive a whole lot after that regarding the good doctor. Let's try not to do so much of the stuff that everybody already knows. He was a grand innovator. He's done so many things for the sport. I feel as if we'd be wasting his time and your time, but just
yeah, you're right. No, you're right. And he wouldn't like that. He wouldn't.
He was a man who valued time and making the most out of it. So I assume, dear listener, that if you are listening, you are more than aware that Don Panoz was one of the big beating hearts of sports car racing and has been for the last couple of decades. What I think, Graham, tell me if you agree, and if not, then we'll go in whatever direction you believe, because again, we just kind of do whatever we feel is right with this show. I think sharing some personal thoughts about him and sharing some of the what I found to be hilarious or endearing reflections that some of the folks we spoke with today offered about Mr. Panoz would be welcome. And I'll just start with a couple of somewhat short ones. I met Don, I don't know how long ago, 10 plus years ago, and despite his better judgment, as you know I say from time to time, he seemed to either like me or not at least think I was a complete idiot. Somewhere in the middle. He was very warm and positive towards me. That isn't the remarkable thing. What I found to be remarkable is he trusted me, Graham. And I mentioned that not in a personal accolade standpoint. I mentioned that in a what that meant to me. The fact that Mr. Panoz, a zillionaire, a person who lives well above most of us in the stratosphere, not just because of his financial means, but because of his mind. The innovations from pharmaceutical to motor. This is a person who was a very unique human being among the billions of us. He trusted me, and I cannot overstate how much of an honor that was. I still cannot talk about some of the meetings and or conversations that he and I had. I probably never will. But I can say that the call from him saying, hey, could you meet me in hotel room such and such at Chateau Alon or wherever, because I want to talk about this thing. And open the door and, here's the man who made $1 billion by inventing the transdermal patch used for nicotine reliance abatement, puffing away on cigarettes in a room filled with tobacco smoke, which drove me mad, but walk into that smoke-filled room and sit down, and sometimes it'd be an hour, it might be 2 hours. And again, there are things that I like to be as open as I can. The both of us do. Can't talk about them, but I can tell you that getting the call from the good doctor to say, hey, this thing's happening, or I'm working on this thing, or this is going on over here, and I know you know nothing about it because I've only told 3 people about it, but I'd like to bring you in on this. Some of these things happened earlier in my newish reporting career. Some of them happened somewhat more recently. Just saying, this was, in terms of bestowments, among the highest honors, strictly for what it meant to me to have Don Panoz place that kind of faith in me. I know I'm not the only one, so again, this isn't so much of a unique thing. I know that there were many people that he trusted. It just meant the world, because I didn't know him before. It's not like I grew up around. I mean, I just met him in motor racing like most of us did, Graham. Man, I sure am going to miss him.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There was never, ever a dull moment with Don Panoz. Lots and lots of very personal memories, some of which are slightly come day, go day. But the one I guess I could share with you for the purpose of this was it was a multiple encounter with him, his family, his company, in 2005, with 2 or 3 races in the United States at that time, and an offer came through to go and see the Panoz production plant. and the private collection they have there. And from there on, to borrow a road car for a bit of a road trip, finishing up at the Laguna Seca race, which in 2005 completed the season. And that happened to be my first wedding anniversary. But spooling back a little, the plant, impressive, kind of Mustang mechanicals for the Panoz Esperanti, but their museum with the fabled GTR road car, the road car version of the astonishing GT1 car designed by Reynard. And the first thing that brought me to Panoz, to my attention as a fan, because you could hear that thing from Belgium, absolutely amazing piece of kit. Watching what was going on there, talking to Don and his son Danny about the oldest car they had in the collection, the AIV Roadster from the mid to late 90s, and a car which they built, and then Don and Danny went on the Grand Tour of Europe in that car. No mean feat with the car that, it has to be said, was none too user-friendly, spooling forward and picking up this astonishing 550 brake horsepower Esperanti GTLM black on black, which turned Patrick Dempsey's personal car. Wow. This we know because his script was in the glove box. Yeah. Doing the Route 1 from LA, from another beloved and sadly late and lamented member of our motorsport family's place on Laguna Beach up to Laguna Seca, and having great fun all the way up there. But before we took that trip, I was a little worried. It's a two-seater sports car. I was going to be away for a couple of 3 weeks. Trudy was flying in to meet me. She is a lady. Ladies do not travel light. Could we actually get all the bags in the car? So at Road Atlanta, Don turned up in the paddock in his own Esperanti. Beautiful, kind of plum-coloured car. And little cheekily said, "Do you mind if I can have a quick look in the trunk?" And he kind of looked at me and said, I explained why, just to see whether or not it was big enough for our bags. Not only did he do that, but he helped me to measure it.
Wow.
It's just, there's so many tales. 2006 and the win at Le Mans, where I was working closely with Team L&T, and what that meant to him. That he'd been working and working and working for that win. Never did it with his LMP cars. But the thought struck me after I'd finished the last piece in today's offerings for Remembering Don, was that there cannot be that many manufacturers of any sort, MP, that have taken class win, in his case at Sebring with Multimatic, at Le Mans with Team L&T, and at the Indy 500, because of course Panoz with their single-seater cars will be
chassis, yeah,
absolutely will be very familiar, I'm sure, to you as well, MP. Just an astonishing individual. I'm not, in any way going to pretend any different than had Don not made the choices he made as to what to do with his not inconsiderable fortune, I simply would not be speaking right now. There simply would not be the kind of industry that would support the kind of enterprise that begat Daily Sports Car back in the day. Without the American Le Mans Series and what that did, frankly, there would be no IMSA today. There would be no WEC today. That changed absolutely everything on so very many levels, including the way that we listen to and the way that we watch live motorsport today. I'll say this much. From the very first race, I think the 1998 Petit Le Mans, John Hindhaught's team were invited to actually attend that race. That begat the LMS radio network, which begat IMSA radio. I think without the success that became for the LMS, I think it's unlikely at this stage we'd be seeing, live streaming audio or video bedded in globally in the way that it's become. Don Panoz, thank you very much for that, because that's made following our sport, reporting on our sport, enjoying our sport, growing our sport so much better, so much more easy to become the global phenomenon that it now is. I'm going to miss him hugely.
Yeah, and you raise a great point and mentioned it in the obituary, not going to too many specifics because obviously Don was the heart of what we should be speaking about, but I always get the exact order mixed up, but the ALMS Radio Web, or exactly whatever it was called, but that internet-based radio service that Don insisted upon having in the late 90s when the ALMS kicked off. If you were a fan of the of not just Radio Le Mans, but of the Midweek Motorsports show, for example, that Graham and I used to contribute to, these are all things in North America where if you're, by and large clued into these things and love them today, we can trace back directly to Don, to the insistence in supporting in these things. And mind you, in every single instance, it's not as if Don was just sitting on top of, a tall chair directing 30 people to do all the things he thought of every moment. I mean, he had great people around him who also had great ideas and put things in motion. But Don was truly the catalyst for all of this. I remember back in my time, my many years at Speed Channel, where the concept of starting to do live streaming video for ALMS sessions that were not televised. Qualifying could have been qualifying, could have been whatever, but these kinds of things where there was a yes, let's do it, and it's not cheap, but yes, let's do it. Always a willingness to say, hey, here's something that's either never been done before, or here are all the reasons why it's never been done before and can't be done, to which Don and or one of his lieutenants and generals would say, we don't really see it that way. Let's figure out a way around that to make this cool thing that hasn't been brought to light a reality. So that's pretty amazing. I'll mention, as well, if we think about what Don did at a time that nobody was saying, hey, women, sports car racing, why is there such a small representation? His formation of the women's global GT series, all using the spec Panoz tube frame Ford powered GT cars. I mean, that was, again, I apologize, 99, 2000, whatever it was, but we're talking today in this modern era of women being free and not just able but truly valued as equals. And to think that 20-ish years ago, Don was saying, hey, wait a minute, why aren't there more women in racing? All right, well, I'm going to start a series for women. And maybe some of those women from that can go on to have bigger careers or bigger opportunities than maybe have been presented. And that was the case. There were a number of women in that series whose name might not have been known so heavily beforehand, but who were able to move on to a world challenge or something, become champions. We think so much about the crazy Batmobiles and the thises and the that's and all the grand ideas that Don had. Then there's somewhere you just go, hey, 20 years ago this guy was saying, gender equality in racing kind of sucks. I have the ability to do something about it, so I'm going to, even on that level.
Well, just think about this. Think about this. What's been going on in just the last year or two, MP, and people agonising about what can we do? Oh no, it's too big a problem. He got off his ass and he did it. 41 cars that thing peaked at. You're absolutely right, by the way. It's 1999, 2000. Had the pleasure not that long ago of a lengthy conversation with the 1999 champion, Cindy Lux, and still quit. She's ace.
She's amazing.
Just a lovely, lovely lady, and really, really quick. Was beating, brand new machinery in what I think was the very first Dodge competition coupe when I saw her at would have been Miller Motorsport Park 2 or 3 years ago. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly the kind of guy that he was, wasn't it? Here's a problem, here's an issue, here's a solution, get it done. And more to the point, got it done, and in some cases made money out of it. Actually was the businessman that actually showed people the way forward. But meanwhile, lots of hand-wringing later, there'll be a working group at the FIA with someone that disagrees with them, trying to come up with maybe 5 things that everybody will pour scorn over all over social media. This after they've been shown the way to do it. Let's go and get it done. Let's give these girls an opportunity to show what they can do. By the way, under the glare of publicity from the parent company, which, by the way, gave some of those people an opportunity to progress.
Amen to that. One of the things that on an already heavy morning, waking up on 9/11 is never particularly fun, but waking up to the news that we'd lost Don Panoz this morning, was able to speak with one of the longtime members of the team, and he mentioned that obviously, this came and took Don rather quickly. He passed at about 6:45 this morning. He said the nice thing was, after having a rough couple of weeks, yesterday, he actually had a really good day. And death is death. It's going to happen however it happens. Sometimes it is misery with just nothing, no form of relent, and the end. It was just nice to hear that Don, after having very hard couple of weeks, at least had a good, warm Monday before we lost him this morning. Something that you and I did, and this, dear listener, you may or may not know, it's not a big thing, but my primary client is Racer Magazine and Racer.com. They are 90+%, sometimes more often than not 100% of what I do every day from a work standpoint. Graham, obviously, is the man in charge and running dailysportscar.com. Cool thing is it's not your client, that's your business, but between my client and your business, we all work together, not as often as we'd like, but there is a strong Racer and DSC link up. And so this morning, just Graham and I doing our thing. Yes, we may host our own weekly sports car podcast, but this morning you and I said, hey, there are an awful lot of people who love Don Panoz and are going to want to speak words, some sort of reverie about him. So you essentially set off and said, all right, I'm going to go after and reach out to these people. I said, all right, I'm going to go and reach out to those people over here. And so we were fortunate to be able to gather a lot of wonderful thoughts from folks. And so knowing that we worked together on this and the stories, the remembrances are posted on both sites, I figured it might be fun to just grab a couple of items, some of the favorite lines from those we spoke with today, Graham, before we move on to some Q&A, and also, a lot of stuff to talk about from last weekend at WeatherTech Raceway, Laguna Seca. I'll throw in a couple. The first person I spoke with this morning, and unfortunately I informed him of Don's passing, was Roger Penske. And knowing that the Penske Racing, as they were then known, Porsche RS Spyders, were a huge part of the American Le Mans Series glory days, and also that RP won the 2003 Indy 500 with Gilles de Ferran in a Panoz G-Force chassis. There's a lot of crossover there. And he offers... how's this? When we think of people in motor racing, I struggle to come up with anyone above Roger Penske. Not just because of his personal success, financial success, but with NASCAR championships, sports car championships, 15, 16, 17 Indy 500 victories, and all of the championships, there are few who are on this earth that have achieved as much as Roger, which means when Roger speaks, that those are words that carry more weight than most. And of the many things he shared, this I just thought was so telling, because he doesn't have to say this, he's Roger Penske. But he said of Don, he was a businessman, someone committed to motor racing, and he was a good friend. I respected him a lot, and in so many ways. I mean, coming from RP, it's pure class. And then the funny thing, I'll mention this, and I realize it's a little bit negative, but we're trying to be honest here. There was only one person, Graham, I didn't even mention this to you, who I reached out to via text, who had driven for Don, and who has a fairly high profile in the open wheel world, and asked if he would care to offer some sort of comment. And he declined. And not because he was so grief-stricken, just, he didn't feel like it. I won't go, I there's a part of me that would love to tell you who that person is, but yeah, I already don't think that highly of the person, and I actually thought less when I got that response. But I mentioned that not just to spill a little bit of tea, Graham, but I mentioned that to couch the many fine words shared by Tommy Milner.
Oh, yeah.
Who is in Hawaii on vacation and took time to call and offer thoughts. So, just saying, very impressive. I love Tommy's story. Keep in mind that obviously his father, very close ties to Don Panoz, and especially with all the success they've had recently, as well with the Pro World Challenge GT4 effort, championship-winning effort. But this quote, I'll just read this portion of the quote, and then let you take us through the final couple. He said, "My first real interaction with Don was around 2000 with my dad, and that at that point, my dad had been helping a little bit on the L&P side as a manager. He said, we walked through the Chateau Alon while Don was having dinner. My dad, my dad wanted to say hello and give him a hard time, say something funny. And I remember vividly, Don turned around, saw me. My dad said I was in go-karts and had been through one of the Panoz driving schools, and being shy, I didn't speak. But Don reached in his pocket, gave my dad $20, and said, here, this is for Tommy's first contract, because he's going to drive for me one day. And Tommy went on to say, I ended up driving for him in 2006 with Multimatic, and I'll never forget that first meeting. How amazing is that, Graham, that even, as a kid in karting, Don made that gesture. And I realize he wasn't actually saying, you're driving for me, but he wanted to be the first guy to pay Tommy Milner and, quote, make him a professional. And ended up becoming a reality. But again, what an amazing guy.
Look, I mean, there's one that's not yet, at least, in our tribute pieces. No, it's one I picked up from Facebook this evening from Tim Mayer. Tim, very firmly part of the IMSA family, FIA steward now. We see Tim at the WEC races and other racing around the world, including Formula One. And he had another one. It's another father-son moment. Was up at the office. Dr. P spotted him with his son, Matthew. Asked him to come for lunch. They tried to object, but of course he's buying. Climb into what's described as his gorgeous W12 Bentley, which his young son, even at the age of 8, those strange to great cars, was just wide-eyed at, purred down Brazelton Highway with the windows down, brackets, inserts obvious reason here why, close brackets, that will be the cigarettes, and enjoying the story of how he'd been first on the list for the car, glided into the parking lot of the restaurant he only ever took friends to, where he greeted the waitress with a hearty, hey darling. Gets the reply, Don, we got your table right over here. And Tim says, if you think my 8-year-old was impressed by the Bentley, that is nothing to how impressed he was that Don Panoz had his own table at the Brazelton Waffle House. Absolutely staggering stuff. Two other quick tales. One came late this evening from Andy Merrick, of course, a factory driver with the Delta Wing team. And those of you who've been following recent events will know that Andy had a terrible accident at the Spa 24 Hours, the unwitting victim of a car being stopped in his path as he came up over Radion. Huge accident. Mercifully, Andy got away from that with relatively minor injuries, and indeed was married 2 weeks later, just back from his honeymoon, caught up with him. And touchingly, what he said was, just 11 days ago, while Don was ill, very ill, an email arrived with Andy, with Don making sure that one of his boys was okay after that shunt. For anybody to take time out to do that when you're going through the illness that Don was going through, I think is pretty extraordinary. But the final word will go to someone I'm hoping to catch up with on a wider sense tomorrow. And that is his long-time team manager, Dave Price, looked after Panoz of old all the way through and into Delta Wing days as well. And this is Price's offering on Twitter this evening. It was always handy having the same initials. I could always nick his parking space and argue about it afterwards. Very amusing company. He, like us, is thinking of Don Panoz's family right now. Good night, Don. It's been an absolute privilege.
Well, we try and have fun when we can, and we will have some fun with some of the Q&A here for sure, but there's really no way to pretend that we haven't just lost something great and someone great, along with Caleb as well. And let's crack on, mate. Among the many awesome questions that we asked you to send, and thank you for sending in. I know that last week we started off rather heavily on the WEC side. So
it's IMSA's turn. It's IMSA's turn.
Yes, and having been there for all of it, boy, yeah. Let's get rocking and rolling, my friend.
Why don't you crack on with Jonathan Grabowski's question? He says, how in God's green earth are Leg and Pruett a GTD team? I thought it's a Pro-Am category.
Yeah, I love driver ratings so much that I hate driver ratings.
Could we get that to be one of our things we're only allowed to mention 3 times?
Yeah, if we could get it to 0 times, that would be absolutely perfect. I cannot honestly say, Jonathan. I know that if we use some of the criteria that the FIA has set out, that, you can certainly say, well, is Catherine a champion of this, that, and the other in this recent time frame? And if not, there's all kinds of excuses and wiggle rooms that are possible here. And would just say that the old sniff test, the old eyeball test, you look at this, does this thing have spots? Got it. It's a leopard. Does this thing have stripes? Got it. That's a zebra. We have to be honest with ourselves in being able to look at all the fine animals in the sports car racing zoo, Graham, and go, hey, it's got a tail, and it's throwing poop at me. It's a monkey. Okay, I don't need a written policy to figure out, is that a monkey or is that a dog? There's a level of practicality, Jonathan, that I guess since sports car racing, as you know, I'm fully convinced is not actually a sporting competition, but an exercise played out to follow heavy rule strictures. This to me is just another one where if someone were to actually put down the pieces of paper with the million different guidelines, and if you're this, it means that, and if you're that, it means this, just look up and go, no. Those are 2 pros. And I'm not singling out Catherine or Alvaro. Those are the ones you happen to mention. But, yeah, it really isn't hard. Even some who've come into the sport as, quote, AMs, who've paid to be in, pick whatever vehicle they're in. You go, okay, well, your background is this. Great. What's your lap time? And are you able to get in the car and just absolutely give the business to the other pros? Well, if you're giving them the business and those lap times are there, then you guys are fighting for the same piece of road. I don't care where you came from. I don't care whether you're paying for it or not. You're a pro. You're hanging with the pros. You are a pro. That kind of crazy, wacky simplicity, Graham Goodwin, makes sense in my mind. Apparently doesn't make sense in the minds of others.
Well, it speaks actually to another question on a very similar subject from Jeff Markowski. When she wins the GTD Championship, do you think Catherine Legg will get a full-time, fully funded ride in IMSA? Well, of course, she's had it before. It certainly can happen again. She's certainly more than good enough. And, in the wake of comments we were talking just a few moments ago about Don Panoz and, his support of women into top-line motorsport, Catherine is proof positive that works. Do I think she could get a full-time drive? Yeah, I do. The fact that the rule set in GTD meant that they had to play the driver ratings game to put that crew together is a completely different issue against the question, is Catherine Legg good enough? The answer to that question absolutely is yes, she is. And can she get a full-time job? I've zero doubt she could. It depends exactly in which class and which car she chooses to kind of aim for. Got another question here. a different subject within IMSA, but two separate questions. One from Mark Whiteleg and the other one from Floodman, our friend from the WEC subreddit. All about the subject of Core Autosport. Mark asks, would there be some irony if Core Autosport wins the prototype class this year, for only to be in a separate class when they're not fighting for overall wins? He says, seems utterly pointless. P2 should race against the DPIs. Even when IMSA bopped them, the Core car was still fast. Floodman says, if they win the IMSA Championship, and it's just a handful of points now, how much of a meltdown would that cause the DPI teams? He's half joking, he says, but on a serious note, what sort of fallout could be expected, if any? Can I just say before we get into your thoughts on this one, and rather more informed thoughts, I think, on this one than I could possibly offer. What I'd say is if Core actually won it, I'd laugh my ass off. I just think it would be funny. Because ultimately, from my point of view, yes, BOP has come into this, but ultimately there have been too many occasions when too many of the DPI teams, for whatever reason, have not done a good enough job, either in terms of reliability, in terms of on-track luck and behaviour, or just in terms of outright pace. That's my 10 penneth. Over to you.
Yeah, the anarchist in me would love to see Core Autosport do everything that we thought would be impossible. And I know with 3 wins in a row by Spec P2s, 2 of those by the Core team, and then another fine runner-up finish last weekend by, in particular, Colin Brown doing more amazing things. If we look at how poorly disadvantaged the P2 cars were for the first half of the season, it would be crazy hilarious. But yeah, so that's a little bit of the anarchist in me. I mean, look here through the questions, wanting to hopefully find, and I apologize, I haven't looked at every single one that you have collated here. I'm going to just assume that there is a great question, and please point me to it if there isn't, on what happened with the race losing entanglement between Harry Tinknell in his...
There is probably the bluntest question from Noah Wheeler says, does Mazda have any feet left to shoot themselves in?
So I spent as much time as I could today writing a little, I guess, somewhat opinion piece, somewhat something piece. It's meant to have a positive note at the end, which I'll save that for the piece. But there's some interesting things that have come out just from calling around and speaking with people, both on the Mazda side and also on the AFS Pier 1 Matheson Motorsports team, of which Gustavo Yakaman, the Yak Attack, was driving for in the number 52 red and yellow Oreca 07 that came together with Harry's RT24P. Graham, the gasps and the amount of people pointing at TV monitors at what took place, the shock of Harry Tinknell being spun, stalled, and unable to get fired and going again right away to resume his lead. The shock and awe, because there was an element of awe to it, I don't think it was, this race just had a dramatic change with 33 or 34 minutes left. I interpreted it to be, oh my goodness. In line with Noah's question of do they have any feet left to shoot themselves, this was the easiest win, Graham, the easiest breakthrough win the Mazda team could have asked for. Final pit stops had been done. They had approximately a 9-second lead on Pipo Derani in his Nissan. That lead had been cut down in the last pit stop exchanges. The Nissan needed less fuel, got out a little bit faster. It was about 17 seconds. It got cut down to 9. But this race was done, my friend. It was absolutely over with. All Harry had to do was go around for another 33 minutes. It was theirs. That car was so fast that even though Pippo was on the boil, I have no doubt that Harry, who had driven like a maniac to get up to the front, along with his teammate Jonathan Bomarito, there was pace in hand if they had to draw back out from Pippo. I mention all that because what took place in Turn 5, for those who watched, one of the most unnecessary situations I can recall, and I know that whatever percentage of folks have laid the blame at Gustavo Jacquemin's hands, I cannot defend him in any way, shape, or form. I'll add in a few things here, Graham, that again I don't think maybe has been expressed so far. Maybe it has somewhere else that I've missed. Gustavo, who I really like as a person, he's a fun and engaging kid. He is also, if we talk driving personalities, completely bipolar. And that's not said to be funny or as a joke. It's not making light of anything. You do not know what you are going to get at any point in time when you come up upon Gustavo Jacquemin. Is he going to be super fair? Is he going to be completely oblivious? Yeah, what's going to you don't know what is going to happen. That is his reputation. It isn't new. It hasn't just been developed in 2018. With what Harry chose to do, I looked at that incident and put the full blame on Harry. And not because I'm looking for blame, but you could see what was going to happen before it even happened. It was, hey, that red and yellow car it's a little bit far ahead, but if I really try and go deep in the braking zone and hope that he sees me and dive towards the apex, maybe I can get through. It was not up on Jacquemin's tail, diving out under braking and out-braking him. We were almost getting into the starting to roll towards the apex and power away scenario. And so what Harry did was place him at the complete mercy of a driver whose personality fluctuates by lap, by corner, who knows? You don't know how he's going to react. You could say, well, did he know that it was Jacquemin in the car? You could also say, well, hey, this is Harry's first season in IMSA, right? He doesn't know everybody. How would we expect him to know the driving
Oh, he
habits?
knows. He knows.
But hold on. Well, I'm just saying, devil's advocate. How would he know? You go, well, and I had the same conversation with team principal at AFS Pier 1 Matheson, who agreed. I said, if you were brand new to IMSA in January, knew nobody, didn't know the driving behavior of anybody, here's one thing you could tell, either from inside your car during practices, qualifyings, and races, or from sitting on the timing stand waiting to drive. Is there one prototype that has been spun, stalled, crashed, spun and stalled, stalled, and crashed, dragging bodywork backwards, hasn't been upside down, I don't believe, but missing a this has fallen off, this is crunched, tail light, headlight, you name it. Is there one car that you have seen while driving and turning your head going, holy cow, how'd you do that? Or we're just sitting watching throughout the season? It has been that red and yellow prototype. That car, when it was a Ligier, this is the first race with the Eureka, that car as a Ligier was so beaten up and battered. And this is not a joke as well, although it might sound like it is. The team switched chassis because they said, this thing's dead. There's no, it's been repaired upon repaired upon repaired. There's nothing left. We can't resuscitate this thing. We have to go to a new car. So, if you're brand new to IMSA, knew nothing about it, you at least have seen firsthand experience. Man, that red and yellow thing is always in some sort of drama or trauma. So with that, you'd say, okay, man, these guys sure do a lot of spinny, crashy, non-thinking things, and I've got an easy, comfortable lead, and we've been in this prototype game without a win since 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017. We're now in the penultimate round of our 5th season. We have had diesels that have broken, blown up, all kinds of problems. We've gone back to the petrol, gasoline-powered turbos with the old Lolas / Multimatic chassis, and got really close, and boy, you name it, but something would break, something this, misfortune. Here we are, the last standard length race of the year, and we got this thing covered. It's even, Graham, it's even at the track that bore our name through March. It's Jonathan Bomarito's home track. Born and raised 30 minutes away. All of his family and friends are there. Pippo Durrani is almost 10 seconds behind. There's a half hour to go. And you come up on that one prototype that is always spinny, crashy, trailing bodywork, dragging this, busted up, beaten up. And what do? You put yourself at the mercy of a driver who, on any given day, any given corner, may or may not see you. And guess what happens? You throw the whole damn thing away because you felt the need to pass the guy in a really high-risk situation where you didn't need to. And even if you chose to sit behind him and get on the gas early and power away out of turn 5 and get past him on the way up the hill, yeah, you'd give a second, maybe 2 seconds to Durrani. But knowing the pace of the car, you could have gotten that back. That, to me, was brutal. And so here are the last couple things I'll throw in why I think so many people reacted the way they did. Like, oh my God. John Doonan, Mazda Motorsports boss, the patriarch of this whole thing. I mean, he has given up 9 or 10 lives with all the heartbreak of coming close and having things break, fall apart, you name it. This car was running flawlessly, had the pace, just had to cruise. Dumbest decision possible, throws the whole thing away. Here's another thing, which it's sad, but Harry was a ball of tears for hours after the race. He wasn't the only one. There were many who were just balls of tears after the race because they realized it will never be easier than this to win on what was our home track named after us for 17 years in front of Jonathan's family. Going to Petite and thinking that you're going to get a win there. Not saying it can't happen. Just saying the odds, knowing it won't
be with Harry. It won't be with Harry because he won't be there.
Exactly. But it's going to be much tougher to do that. Now, the one thing that I'll throw back a little bit is, and I have confirmed this, so this isn't speculation, the Mazda team walked, seeing that they were coming up on this red and yellow hand grenade. Not sure if the pin was in or out. The Mazda team, knowing they were coming up on that car with Jakomin in it, went over to the PR1 team and said, hey, could you please tell him to let us by? Why, Graham? Because they were already a lap down, right? This wasn't for position. They were already a lap down. This would have been 2 laps, okay? But this was not a car that was in contention because it had hit one of the Nissans earlier in the race and was penalized for it. And then after that penalty, hit a GT car. So by this stage, my friend, the red and yellow battering ram, even though it was brand new and shiny from Oreca, had already hit and been penalized one time, then hit another car. The PR1 team told me when Mazda came down and asked, hey, could you please tell your guy to let us go? They said, you don't need to. We already did. So they could see what was happening and radioed Jakomin, and that still happened. So I'm not saying, again, I realize that that might come across as being harsh on Harry. I am, because it was the most unnecessary risk-taking imaginable, knowing all the factors that I mentioned, the 5 years, the drought. Oh my God, these folks just feel like the world's against them. But even when he was instructed to let the leading red Mazda by, still didn't make that happen. So, altogether, my friend, and back to Noah, your question, maybe this is splitting hairs. I almost don't see this as a Mazda shooting themselves in the feet kind of thing. I realize Harry's an employee and he's part of the team, but this isn't a you almost had it and the turbo blew or the wheel fell off or the whatever. This was the team doing everything right and a driver for absolutely no reason deciding to do what was not necessary and could have them leaving the season, leaving their 5th consecutive season without a win.
As I say, for me, one of the saddest things is that Harry won't have a chance to put that right because he won't be at Petit Le Mans. He won't complete the season with Mazda because we've got that clash between Petit, IMSA season finale, of course, and the Fuji race of the WEC, and Harry's Ford GTE Pro contract takes precedence. So for him, that is season game over in IMSA. I hope the team will agree that he's done enough in terms of his pace and application to get another shot at this one. I think he has done that, but what can you say? Disaster for them at Laguna Seca. Let's move on, though. Let's talk a little about the WEC. And I've gone looking through literally dozens of questions. Again, thank you, everybody, from Facebook, from Twitter, from the Reddit groups, again, and with our new friends as well, not just at the WEC group, but also the IMSA, the USCR group on Reddit too, putting in some questions too. Gaggle of questions that surround, generally speaking, the issue of LMP1 non-hybrid, but particularly around a couple of bits and pieces of news that have been breaking this week to do with the Ginetta effort. They come from Sept Ben 11, from Phil Oakley, from Stuart Hart, and from Joshua 97. Many and various points made here, but generally speaking, the question is around what can we say about Ginetta and what's happened in terms of this program? What lessons might this have? Will Ginetta be back next year? Will they be looking for a separate customer team? And then the more general point with the lack of ultimate competitiveness of the non-hybrid cars. How many of these cars do we expect to see back next year or indeed next season? Because, of course, next year we're still in this season. Right, first and foremost, just a little bit of a kind of a teach-in about where we are. Ginetta are not the entrant. The entrant are TRSM Racing. TRSM Racing is a combination of Chinese entity and Manor, in the manner of Graham Loudon. Ginetta cannot enter a car, cannot change the entry to a car, cannot change the engine in the entry. They are not the entrants. They are a provider. They are a company that has, in theory at least, sold a car to TRSM. The change has come. The change has come here with apparently TRSM having requested the change to an AR engine. The entry has been put in for the Fuji round at least with one car, with Alex Brundle, Oliver Rowland and Mike Simpson, who steps across from the Ginetta-funded 5 car that was confirmed to Le Mans only. And we wait and see. What we do know, because this much was out there in public in the aftermath of disaster at Spa when the cars didn't get to do competitive laps, and also around Le Mans 24 Hours where they did, that we wait and see whether or not the commercial issues for the team will prevail. We'll wait and see, and I'll make my final determination when I turn up at the Fuji Speedway and see whether or not the garage contains a nice shiny blue Ginetta with white stripes on it. I think at this stage it really comes down to this much. TRSM as the entrants have got to prove that they've got the commercial situation under control to the point where they're partners in that. And we now know that Manor have said that they will not be involved in that process. Their partners in that are satisfied financially that they've been done right by. Moving on from there, whether or not that car shows in Fuji, what lessons do I think that has for the remaining pack? Well, I don't think that's the big issue Ginetta certainly know they've got to find new partnerships, new teams. That was always the intention in any case. Of course, their difficulty is they need to show the competitiveness of the car, and that's very difficult if the current entrant for the car doesn't turn up to some of the races. So they are looking very actively for new customers. We'll wait and see what success they might have with that. But the problem, of course, that they're now caught in is this is an 18-month season. So, and this is an invitation. You cannot enter a race-by-race car with a standalone team in LMP1. That is in the regulations. That's done to prevent people coming in and doing a one and gone with Le Mans, which ironically at the moment is exactly where the Ginetta lies. The 5-car is allowed in that instance, by the way, because you are allowed to enter a second or indeed a third car in those instances. So they're caught in something of a trap in the 2018-19 season. I don't suppose it's feeling very super to Ginetta at the moment.
I just had Fine Young Cannibals running through my mind. Caught it to the old Elvis Presley song they did.
Yes, sorry. Caught in a trap. You're right, it's messy. So aside from that on LMP1 non-hybrid, lots to prove. We haven't heard yet whether or not there will be changes ahead of Fuji. I think it would be more sensible politically to expect that you might see something after Fuji. I can immediately, by the way, sweep away another couple of internet rumours that suggest that a third Toyota might show up there. Absolutely not. The most senior sources that I've spoken to, that no chance of seeing a third Toyota there. Let's wait and see, because ultimately I'm firmly of the opinion that unless we can actually see more on-track competition, and as we've discussed on previous shows, that's remarkably difficult to deliver when you've got a package as good as the Toyota TS050. You can't really do much to restrict the power of that car because of the interconnection between the hybrid drive and the braking system. So realistically, all you can really do is add weight, which certainly Toyota would not be happy about, or mess about with things like pit stop timing to a degree where it becomes more a more obvious pendulum than we've had on the other side. So it's going to be interesting to see just how light-footed the rule makers can be, because they surely must see what we all now see, which is there is a major problem beginning to emerge. This is not over when we get to June of next year and the Le Mans 24 Hours, the final round of the 2018-19 championship, because the new rule set and therefore new factory cars don't arrive for a further year after that. The question, and it's being asked more and more loudly, is how many privateers will stay that course? Let's wait and see what we hear from the powers that be, because I'm afraid at this stage that's the best option. Change has got to come if you're going to inject confidence that people are investing their money wisely, and with new rules on the horizon, my guess would be that's something that they're very well aware of indeed right now.
I just had a bizarre thing that popped into my head, which happens quite frequently, so I can't say if this is abnormal. Just got a little WhatsApp note here from our boy, young Alan McNish, who will be having dinner with Al Sunday night after the IndyCar season finale. So if you're wondering where to find me, I will probably be asleep in a plate of some form of Asian food that dear Al has ordered for us. So I'm just mentioning that because it's Alan McNish, and he's crazy, and it's been about 7 or 8 years since we've been able to have dinner up here on one of his Bay Area visits. So since we're talking sports cars, and we're talking about things that have absolutely nothing to do with Alan McNish and dinner, I thought it'd be the perfect point to mention those things. So there you go. Let me grab Kevin Frederico and his question. I love this, and we might even extend it beyond IMSA. He says, since Scott Dixon is considered the greatest of his generation in terms of IndyCar, who is Scott's counterpart in prototype, GTLM, and GTD, or GTLM/D of the IMSA world? I cover IMSA kind of full-timey and IndyCar full-timey, so I'd love to hear from you who you might regard as absolute Dixon status type in IMSA prototype and GT racing, then maybe we can talk about on the WEC side.
Well, okay, let's have a think about that. Well, you've got to look to who's been successful over a long period of time in terms of winning big races and winning championships. And I think in prototype, you'd have to go a long way to say João Barbosa would not be the Scott Dixon typey person. He didn't have the best of luck last weekend, of course, but Scott Dixon, I think, would be my choice there. Thinking about GTLM, that's a toughie because it tends to kind of ebb and flow, doesn't it? But I'm struggling to escape the kind of gravitational pull of Corvette racing. It's been an odd thing, and I don't know what you think about this, MP, but there seems to be an ebb and flow between the two crews in terms of pace and luck. But there, over the vast period of time that team has been together, Ollie Gavin, I think, might well be someone that you kind of think towards. Maybe Mags, but in more recent years, Garcia has been just epic. But over a career, Oliver Gavin is just, we will come to look back when Ollie's career is finally done at some point in the next century, and think, what an astounding servant to the sport he's been. They will have statues of Oliver Gavin at the Corvette National Museum, I'm sure, when his career is done. GTD is a little more difficult simply because
Mirko Bortolotti. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Wait a minute. Sorry. I
reckon Jeroen Bleekemolen might well be my pick for that one.
That's about as laser accurate as I can come up with, and of course I look forward to the emails, texts, or otherwise from other drivers saying, "You moron! How could you choose? How could you choose J-Ron Bleakatown or whatever his Bleaky Moles or whatever his name is?" I mean, there are many folks who own wristfuls of Rolex 24 watt of Rolexes from their 24-hour wins and otherwise. But
by all means, by the way, do remind Alan McNish when you have dinner that he's not one of them.
Well, to be honest, a lot of our conversations involve me reminding Alan of all the things he's not, and then he reminds me of all the things I am, which is far too large. Far too large. Okay, I don't even know on the WEC side. I if this was 2 or 3 years ago, it'd be pretty easy. I can't point at any one of the Toyota drivers necessarily and say that they're that greatest of their generation. I mean, I could look at on the hybrid side, Buemi is really the only through line for me that I could say of the remaining. Right, but again, if we were to throw the Porsches in and the Audis and whatnot, then...
Well, remember, you have got a couple of survivors that are still there in the rebellion.
Yeah. No, understood.
Mr. Yanni, you've got like Mr. Lotterer.
Yeah, I mean, there's great stuff there too. I think Buemi is Buemi I could see in any of those models and probably standing out as the best. And so for me, I'd probably go with Seb, and who knows, that might change tomorrow. On the GT side, oh boy, that's, again, when I say hard, I'm like, okay, we're talking about picking fantasy scenarios, so not really that hard, but wow, I think I might fail miserably on this one if I'm to pick kind of a well-known, long-standing WEC GT driver because, well, I mean, there's some where you could say Bruni would come to mind in that conversation.
Comes back into it now, doesn't he?
Yeah. Although he hasn't always had the car because one's either been long in the tooth or one's kind of newish, but Darren Turner, I mean, that guy is all-time great level operator. Beyond that,
by the way, driver of the weekend at the Goodwin Revival last weekend.
See, that guy has potential. I don't know. I might be struggling to come. I think
you're right with Bruni. I think the man over the length of his career in GT Pro that probably comes closest, and he's another man that's taken a championship in the WEC, is possibly Nicky Team. He scores big points with me for being literally bonkers. Absolutely is one of those guys. There's others that kind of kick around. I mean, the difficulty with, of course, the Pro-Am classes is that the entry tends to be rather more transient, like to Matt Griffin certainly come to mind. There's going to be others emerging from the talented pool of junior and aspirant Porsche factory drivers. Matteo Caroli springs to mind. Bruno Senna in his LMP2 days. It does take a very good driver indeed to stand out in effectively a spec class, and Bruno did that last year. So, yeah, I think it is quite tricky simply because we've not had the stability of some of those crews that maybe you've had in IMSA racing over the last number of years, and in particular with the LMP1 pack falling away as a factory kind of effort. It's a tough question, but yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's not. I agree with you. It's not as easy a pick as I reckon I found it with IMSA, simply because of the heritage that some of these guys have got.
We need to just yell at our listeners. You need to ask us easier questions. You expect us far too much from us. We're not that. Our brain movies aren't as capable as they once were. But all kidding aside, PNC is proud to sponsor Scott Dixon, driver of the number 9 car for Chip Ganassi Racing. Scott knows that the road to victory lane starts today. Copyright 2018, the PNC Financial Services Group Incorporated. All rights reserved. PNC Bank, National Association, member FDIC. Let's see, have we tapped into any of the funny ones yet?
We've not. Well, I mean, there's a couple of bits and bobs around kind of other series. We'll come back to that. How long are we going to go on with this one, MP?
Let's see, where are we at? We're hour 15-ish, hour 20 or so. Why don't we give ourselves another 40-ish minutes or so? Although it's past midnight your time, so
it's an interesting one. This is an interesting one. It came up a little in one of my points to do with Don Panoz. It comes another one from our friend Floodman at Reddit. How has the advent of social media, 24-hour news cycle, presence of groups like theirs on Reddit, but also Facebook and Twitter, changed the way you report on or cover events? That's a really interesting and, should I say, intelligent question, because things have changed immeasurably. I'll give my first crack, if you like, with that, which is, well, Daily Sports Cars here because that's exactly what we've got. You've got the internet, you've got the opportunity for aspirant reporting talent to come and do what we do at events and off events, which we simply didn't have. And my ex-business partner, now retired, Malcolm Cracknell, our founding editor, spotted that opportunity and spotted the option for him to do what had been driving him nuts and do a better job than the established weeklies in the mid-1990s, which is a long, long time ago in internet terms. I've had some very amusing conversations with some established media about this when various failings of our product have been pointed out, and it's had to be pointed out equally bluntly that I'm sorry, but we're kicking their ass. And, that's what we did. We came in, we wanted to do a better job for you, the listeners and the readers. That's what we hope we've done from the very beginning. We've had some good times with it. We've had some bad times with it.
That's a Led Zeppelin song. Sorry.
Indeed. Yeah, by the way, you will be seeing some major changes coming forward very soon. I hope to be able to tell you about that on a future show. But how do things change? Everything changes with those kind of factors. I come from a professional background where I literally never want to go back and do the job I used to do, which was crisis communications,
animal husbandry.
Yeah, counter-terrorism, that kind of thing. When everybody is a potential, in parentheses, reporter, and when everybody has got more immediate information than you've got at the end of a phone line, those kind of things become a problem. Equally, it does make some things easier for us. The fact that you, as the person receiving the journalist's work, have got the opportunity to effectively test that with a myriad of different means, including your own view on a live stream or live commentary, as well as what you can do from trackside. You can follow it all from trackside and see any number of different camera angles, because people are doing that on their phones or their cameras from trackside and uploading it directly to the internet. at times can cause some difficulties because we can only know what we know. We can only know what we either observe or what we're told from the people directly involved. And sometimes, you know what? They can get it wrong. And sometimes they might not tell us the whole truth. But it does sometimes make it more difficult. The audience can be more critical, but the audience too can be wrong, as Marsha was explaining a little earlier in the show about some of the response and the reaction to drama we saw there. Generally speaking, in terms of the enjoyment of our sports and the ability for us to do as good a job as we are physically and mentally able, all the things you lay out there are very good things. It does, however, come into conflict with what we do when an individual or a collective opinion differs from what we know to be factually accurate. At times, it is quite difficult to get that point across without stepping into an area where you're in somebody's confidence, or without actually doing that very modern thing and forgetting that we actually should always debate and start to argue. That's where I start to struggle with the current status quo, MP.
My answer will be different than yours because we have different relationships in terms of outlets and responsibilities. Yep. For you, you are Daily Sports Car, along with Stephen Kilby and the rest of the team. But you ultimately are Daily Sports Car. Whether you tweet something out or post something on Facebook,
Tis my train set. Yes,
on the DS via a DSC handle, or on using your personal Graham Goodwin, whatever it is, you are one and the same. With me, I have clients. I do not have my own media organization. And so with that in mind, there's the ability for some, and I would say possibly in a negative angle as well, who have their own media outlet, are their own lead reporter, editor, you name it, it's theirs. When they say something, it is being said as the voice of that institution. There's ultimately a conversation to have with yourself. I have something that I heard. Is it fully credible or not? I don't know. Well, I'll put it out. Yeah, you don't have a boss that's going to push back and say, "What the hell?" I mean, that barely even qualifies as a rumor. But there are no checks and balances, and in those instances, sometimes that's, I don't want to call it a limitation. It's a good thing to have checks and balances, but immediacy, which is, I think, what a lot of us associate with social media, the ability for, hey, someone told me that the driver was okay in that crash, and you go, boom, straight to the web, was told driver is okay in the crash. You might get some backlash if you're incorrect, probably from the team or the series, or maybe even some readers. But ultimately, there's no one above you saying you're suspended, you're fired, you're whatever. So the boundaries, whatever they are there for one to play with and manipulate as desired. You would hope that every person who has no checks and balances always opts for the correct behavior, as we see and have seen. That isn't necessarily always the truth. I would say one other thing, Graham, which is maybe another unique angle, and again, just mentioning it from what I know. So with Racer, for example, or even a Road and Track, two long-standing institutions, one that's been around for 26 years, the other one for 70, I don't know, like forever. These are some important names. And while I am a self-admitted ass, and act like an ass quite often, and I'm just, that's my nature. I realize that while there are many people that I might want to go after and engage in all kinds of F you, no F you on social media, that while I do not work for my client, while I am not an employee of my clients, I will be associated with them, and this will reflect poorly on them. At least if it was my own company, you could say, well, maybe my advertisers are going to get upset, but again, there's no checks and balances, so I'm doing whatever I think is right. I know that I cannot say everything that I want to say because I have to keep in mind that I'm, even via clients, part of their institutions, and what I do or don't do or say or shouldn't say can directly affect a lot of people in a very negative way. It's not that I'm the one of one type guy or one of two or three, and people just have to live with it. So with all that said, it makes for a rather different approach that I have with social media. And so I'll just wrap on this by saying, if I do post something, I try not to post something that takes away from a client. Right? When someone asked today, I've heard the news about, I've heard reports about Dr. Panoz being dead. I did not reply to that. I could have replied and said, yes, it's true, but the reality is I was finishing up the obituary to file to my client, which is what they pay me to do, and the response to give would be when I have a link to offer, to then send back the link, which is the answer to that question. But taking away from potential traffic, value, income for my client by trying to get ahead. I have a fairly decent social media following, Graham. I could go on and be every little thing that hits my inbox. Boom, Marshall Pruett just said this. Well, that's not what I'm paid to do. So that's the line, at least, that I have to try and toe. I'm perfectly good with it. So when I do post stuff, I try to make it a little bit more personal, an observation, or some photos of something, or a little video where it maybe complements the work that I've done, or just shares a little bit deeper insight from my somewhat warped perspective. So, but being able to go straight to the web with everything, because I'm the number one guy and have no checks and balances, that's not an experience I really know.
I think you're absolutely spot on. I'm in a family where one of my numerous siblings is indeed a national newspaper reporter, and it's a very tough place to be at the moment because, number one, it's not a business model that's working particularly well, and number two, a lot is expected of you in terms of content. It's a stunning piece of television that was aired on the BBC. I think it did. Was it Showtime in the States? Looking at the New York Times.
Yeah, brilliant.
Immediate period. That I genuinely urge anybody, if you've got access to that story, and trying to think what it was called, MP, but to take a look at a couple of episodes of that, because that does show what it's like in a massively pressurized modern 21st century media environment, and particularly at a time of vast and aggressive change. It's not like that down in my not a shed on Daily Sports Car, but it does have its pressures, and you do have to make some pretty stark choices about what it is you present to the audience and in what particular order, particularly if, as we've got unfortunately today, my regular partner in crime not being on duty this week because he's actually, would you believe it, having a holiday? Unbelievable.
No, those are illegal. That is strictly that's
fired.
In the rule book. Those are illegal. Bad.
But it is an interesting dynamic. It's one, you spot MPRI and we're not running between engagements and a paddock, do come and ask us. More than happy to engage with you guys, but there are going to be times when we can't, for the reasons that MP lays out. For the reasons in my case generally tends to be there is just physically too much to do in the allotted time for it. But it's a very interesting question, and yes, things have changed massively. Let's have a quick look.
I've got one here from our boy Andrew Baca, a.k.a. Baxter. He says, let's play a game, swap a class, trademark, copyright, and then says, Pruett, don't steal this. Sorry, already registered the URL, and the T-shirts have been made. Thank you, Andy Blackmore. All right, Andrew says, let's play a game. I'll give you two classes. You pick a car from either class, which you'd like to see reworked to the other class's set of regulations. I'll set a baseline car, and you're trying to come up with a better swap. He says, for me, MP, it's IMSA GTP and GTP Lights. Your baseline is the Spice Ferrari GTP Lights car, upgraded to the big class. Graham, it's GT3 and GTE. Your baseline is a Morgan Aero 8 GTE, formerly GT3. All right. So,
Blow my mind.
I know. First of all, Andrew, I need to quit the show so you can take my role because you've got better stuff than I do here. Reworked to the other side of class. Okay.
So in other words, we're looking for a car that would do that job better?
Yeah, basically something from, at least in the construct here, something where that car might work better with the opposite form of rules, say in his instance here, the smaller 3-liter, I believe 3-liter was the displacement maximum for that Ferrari road-based V8 used in a couple of Spice GTP Lights cars, but about it possibly being upgraded to the big class. And then your baseline being the Morgan Aero 8 GTE. That's a really good question about what... I mean, if I guess the opposite direction, we would say, well, the Ford GT probably isn't too far from being a DPI with a couple of little tweaks. Add a fin down the back of that sucker, and you're almost in DPI regulations. But
I'll lob one in, which is I'd love to see, and I sadly don't think we are now going to see a McLaren GTE car. So the 650S GT3, which I think is a very good-looking car, I think would have made a fine basis for a GTE. I think there is still the possibility that whilst the much heralded Senna looks like it's not going to be a GTE car, there is still the possibility that the forthcoming 720S GT3, don't know, haven't had open answers to questions, could still be something along the lines of a 488, which can be actually prepared as either, and I believe we're not a million miles away from that with the Aston Martin Vantage either. So I think a McLaren would be a nice one to actually see to the other regulations. I've heard others say the Bentley. I have to say, I'm tending towards preferring something that looks a bit more like a Ferrari Porsche 911 than the BMW M8 / Bentley big GT cars. For me, the McLaren, I think that's what the question is would you like to see something that only exists as a GT3 into the GTE kind of category, and they're the two that stand out for me.
Spooled in one way or the other. Does anybody, by the way, in the WEC refer to the BMW as the BMW Mate, since it's the
No, although actually I've just noticed one of the noticed that there was a question that fit further down. Where is it? It was to do with
did I see that and I processed it but didn't fully grasp it?
It was just trying to find the question now, and it was to do with... Where's that gone? We'll come back to that in a moment. It was to do with... There we go. It's from Bald This Way. Great name. If you could make a sports car inspired pie, what would it be? I was going to say an M8 and potato pie, but it's not very good, I'm afraid.
I would, there's a part of me that was thinking that a Mazda RT24P, the soul reddish color, reminds me a little bit of God, why am I forgetting the name of it? Not Devil's Food Cake, but Red Velvet Cake, which I believe is just chocolate cake that is dyed red.
Can I just say, by the way,
but that's not a pie.
I was loaned. I'd not really thought about the soul red thing, other than the car does look great in it. I was loaned a Mazda MX-5 fairly recently for a weekend by our good friends at Mazda in the UK, just down the road from us here. And on that car, that colour is just stunning. It's absolutely amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful colour. And it does lift that little car to be greater than the fairly considerable sum of its parts. It's a truly lovely, lovely colour to see on the road. And once you've seen one, you keep spotting other cars that are in that colour. It's a great colour.
Let me cover off Andrew's question here. Two things come to mind, and again, this is a great class, swap a class. I won't steal it, but I did just register it and own it. And you actually owe me for writing it down, Andrew. The Lamborghini Huracan GT3 has always struck me as the only IMSA GTD car. Not talking Blancpain or Pirelli, where we have some other really sexy McLarens to it sits against and fits in that range. But strictly an IMSA GTD, it's the only GT3-based model that I think looks out of place. Because it is, I realize it's based on the Audi R8, but it looks so amazing and sharp and aggressive, and this is against a lot of cars that are kind of lumpy and frumpy and farty and whatever else. It's the one car to me that just stands out as, that I don't really think Pro-Am when I see it.
Hypercar plays sports car plays GT car type thing.
That could be very. It would be better played, I think, visually and whatever in GTLM/GTE. We know that, we came close to having a Lambo Huracan-ish based thing in GTE/GTLM that did not go forward. But that's one where I think, pull it out of GTD, put it in GTLM, that fits a little bit better. The other one is maybe an even bigger leap on the prototype front. That would be the Norma, N30 LMP3 car, the one that was really freaking awesome last year in IMSA. I love it because it's wacky and French, as are many things involved with sports car racing. Could be people, could be events. But that Norma, knowing how competitive it was in the hands of Colin Thompson with I believe it was the only one in the field going up against a lot of Ligers and whatnot, but a lot of other well-proven LMP3 cars. I would say that, with concerns about the health of IMSA's LMP2 class as it branches off into its own thing next year, I'd love to see that Norma grown, magnified, scaled up a little bit to full LMP2 and see how that could perform, because A, it would add even more diversity to the prototype class, and hey, it's wacky. It's not a high-volume Ligier, Areca, or whatever else. That could work. And then at the same time, we might also say the Ave Riley LMP3 too, which looks like nothing else. I like the looks of it, and that too could be fun. But yeah, I might say take one of the LMP3 cars playing over here, Andrew, and try using some P2 rules to get it a little bit into a faster, more fun, a little bit bigger frame, and that would be my pick. I like swap a class, so don't be afraid to throw other examples in for future episodes, and maybe we can think about that too.
That could be fine. That could be fun. You mentioned the Norma, by the way. We had a race for the Michelin Le Mans Cup at Paul Ricard earlier this year, and we actually had wet track conditions for, I think it was actually their prologue test. And it's the Lennon racing car based in the UK that is in a red and white livery. And the car, in not great conditions, so a bit of spray around, when it came around the final turn, you would swear that thing was a Toyota TS050. You would swear it. It's astonishingly similar, and obviously the proportions are slightly different, but the general look of it, from a distance, if you squint a little, if you kind of put your peak of your cap down a little, amazingly similar to it. Now, to the point where it's now become a bit of a paddock leg-pulling job as to why the form of that car won at one of the Road to Le Mans races in the hands of Duncan Tappy and Mikey Benham, but why that car is showing the pace that it does. Okay, can we move on to one? I've got one I can answer very quickly here. It comes from James Hewitt, asking whether or not there's more news in regard to any GT entries in the forthcoming Asia Le Mans series. So far, doesn't look to be many at all for the upcoming season. I can tell you that we are expecting announcements of more. I have a little bit, not a lot, of slightly privileged information. I will be, again, a part of the broadcast team with some interesting changes, it has to be said, that I'm not going to say much about yet because I've not been fully briefed, but I think you'll be seeing rather more of myself and my co-commentator Jeevan Silvanatam this season, but my
live
understanding
eels.
is
You'll have live eels on the microphone.
I'll say this much, I am told we will be on camera. That's not a pleasant prospect unless you're a massive fan of slightly overweight, silver-haired blokes in their mid-50s. I don't mean that Jeevan's like that. He's actually a good-looking bloke, damn him. But I believe we might well have cameras in the commentary booth this year. Let's wait and see whether or not that one comes to play.
Or it could be they've gone to a second-hand audiovisual store, decided to save money on chairs, and you'll just be sitting on top of old Betamax camcorders. That's the other option.
It's always the case. You have to wait until what you've been told might happen actually does happen. If what I've been told might happen, and this has come not from the championship organisers but some of the teams involved. Last year we had a mighty full season of 3 entries in the GT class, so completely understand why you're offering that kind of slightly sceptical outlook, James. The answer here is that I am hearing of potential to substantially better that, and I have spoken to prospective entrants from with cars that represent 4 different makes, all GT3s at this stage, and that in some cases we know already, because the Chanshi Racing team have already said that they will be entering 2 cars this season rather than their 1. But I'm not going to make any predictions other than to say that the early signs, and it's not that early now, are that there might be a substantial uplift in the number of full season GTs, and that we might see some others coming in for the odd race here and there. So let's wait and see.
What? How crazy is that? Oh man, I'm sorry. I'm really struggling with cognitive abilities today. We've had someone ask about the inspiration of what vehicle is the prototype in our Week in Sports Cars logo modeled after. And although I did not ask for it, it would appear the great Roger Warwick, who done drewed me and done drewed Graham, plus that prototype, it sure looks like a Ligier JSP217 to me. So that's my guess, but if you all see something different, then let us know.
I thought it was a P3.
I was hoping it was a Picchio. I did just send Graham something privately here, and I realized
I've just seen it, and it's
we're
awesome.
talking about visuals in a radio audio format, which is the worst ever crime. But I just sent Graham through a proof for a different prototype that will be featured between the two of us for a very special event at Petit Le Mans, which I look forward to announcing here soon. It will be not the first, but among the first actual paid, hired, put on a live Weekend Sports Cars podcast that we will do. And we were asked by a specific manufacturer to do this, and I got paid a lot because Graham's not there, so I took his share. Deal with it, sucker.
Well, I mean, is it worth saying at this point that we are talking to a number of events and championships about the potential to push this wider for next season, next year?
It's another sly fat joke you're making at me. All right, I see how it is, pal.
But what's been, I think, a particularly nice thing is that there's been very widespread interest in us doing that. So, let's see how this one develops. Keep telling your friends. If people that are interested in sports car racing and do like a little bit of interaction, that's what we're here to do. That's what we're trying to do, is spread a little bit the word, spread the love, grow the audience. That's what this is actually all about, is if we get more people enthused about thinking a bit more about the racing that we all love to watch, then that works for absolutely everybody.
Sorry, we're talking. Let's spend the rest of the show talking over one another and see how many people can pick up both sides. That would be brilliant. That person might be the smartest person. Let me grab 2 here quickly, just because I like them, but I figure we'll infuse a little bit more IMSA before we jump back to Wecky Weck Weck. This comes in from Jacques Roy, or possibly Roy, depending on whether you are of the French denomination. Said some very nice thing about our content and such. He says, with DPIs being freed up from the restrictions they have been saddled with this year, how drastic will the performance increases be next season? Seconds per lap, visibly noticeable, question mark. Need to answer that with a question mark, Jacques. There's assumptions, for sure, that there are multiple seconds, probably two, waiting to be had by the DPIs if IMSA just took all hands off, took all weight off, any additional weight that's been added. There were some points early, not too long ago this season, where they went back to some old-timey performance levels, balance of performance levels. There we go. We just used one. And, they were pretty quick, but I think that there's certainly some speed to be had there. Do I think we're talking, oh my God, stand 20 feet back from the fences because the cars are so scary? No. I mean, keep in mind these are still LMP2 based cars, even though the DPIs are allowed to have more power, aerodynamic freedom compared to the spec P2 cars. These aren't LMP1 grade machines. 700 to 800 horsepower. Yeah, it's a little bit more of a challenge than I would like, just based on what the formula is. I think when we get to the next formula, Graham, here in a couple years, where we do expect a bespoke, custom, albeit spec, hybrid system to be in place, yeah, that's then when you can tack another 100, 150 horsepower on top with ease and get to that 800 to 850 number through the combination of internal combustion engine power plus hybrid power. But yeah, definitely faster, but I don't think we're going to see complete insanity. Last thing I'll mention on this topic real quick, Jacques, is, as our friends at Michelin told us, and I've heard from some others who were there for the tests, they're doing their best to develop tires for next season with that anticipated lap time improvement there. But, until IMSA says we know this is exactly what we're going to do, there's a little bit of guesswork taken in. I can say that from a lot of past experience, one that I know that you have as well, Graham, in watching Michelin at work, they make some pretty darn good tires, and I'm confident that they will be able to accommodate whatever lap time might be forthcoming. Let me jump over to Theodore Paul Kruper, who asks a question that I have been asking myself for many years since IMSA/Grand Am has been at one of my two home tracks. He says, having just been to IMSA at WeatherTech Raceway, I can't help but wonder where all the fans were. So the Sunday crowd looked thin, as did Saturday. Comments or opinions, Marshall and Graham. It was a typical good show for both days, so what gives? I'll tell you what, Theodore, if I had that answer, I would be paid a high amount of money from both IMSA and the track, because there was quality racing across the whole time. And not just WeatherTech, but Conti. Boy, the Conti race was a thrill, especially at a close, with leaders running out of fuel and so on. The Super Trofeo races were good. The Porsche GT3 Cup stuff. Genuinely, if you showed up at the track Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, you should have been really happy with what you saw, because there was a lot of action. There were crashes, there was ineptitude, there was excellence, all kinds of stuff where you go, wow, okay, that was a really good show. Unfortunately, there weren't a lot of people to watch that very good show. I am not someone who can tell you exactly how many people were there on Sunday. My guess, someone else asked me, a colleague asked, said, I watched the race and there was a lot of empty grandstands and whatnot, and I don't know what the correct number is. If I were to suggest there were between 3,000 and 5,000 people, I don't feel like I would be underplaying things at all. I'd love to tell you there were 50,000. That would be the best thing. But at least in this modern era, post-American Le Mans Series era, even then, man, I gotta admit, Graham, not every American Le Mans Series race, especially in the later years, was just chock full of people. But especially when Grand Am/IMSA started showing up in more recent years, boy, people don't seem to have had a lot of passion for those products. And it makes me wonder if some of it is legacy of, hey, I know IMSA is kind of the son of Grand Am, but if there weren't fans showing up for Grand Am, and there was nobody. I guarantee you, nobody. It might be a little bit false to think that there was some crazy amount of folks saying, aha, IMSA is back. Yeah, it is, but there's just something truly lacking there. There's no nostalgia, I can tell you that.
It's a job to do, isn't it?
Well, the other quick concern is next year, mate, where IMSA goes down in September, followed the following weekend by IndyCar on its return to Laguna, and also for its season finale. I am sufficiently concerned that next year's IMSA race, by comparison to the very small turnout this year, is going to be a ghost town. Because for those who have to choose either time away from work or, finances and whatnot, they're going to pick the old, fun, nostalgic Indy cars, which we know are going to put on a heck of a show because they're really fast and there's some wicked talent at play. So, Theodore, I don't have an answer. I love it. I wish there were more people there who loved it, who turned up to see it, and I fear IndyCar is only going to make things worse.
I'd add just this, which was, I think there was a question last week, it may have been a couple of weeks ago, that asked about crowd numbers for the WC race at Silverstone. I don't write crowd numbers anymore. I've made as MP was saying a little earlier in the show, it's my privilege, if you like. I'm the editor, I'm the co-owner of Daily Sports Car, and I simply won't be lied to. It's as simple as that. So I don't believe a very large proportion rather, of the crowd numbers that we are quoted from a wide range of events. And if I don't believe it, I won't write it. What do I know about the crowd numbers for Silverstone? I think they were very strong. There was a very large contingent of people, numbering, I would estimate, into the thousands, that were there, drawn by the star quality of the likes of Fernando Alonso and Jenson Button. The crowd lines for the pit walks and autograph sessions were vast, very long indeed, but it is something of a modern disease. It comes back, oddly, to that question earlier from Floodman, doesn't it? Which is, if you've got availability of actually watching this thing live, why would you risk the weather? Why would you pay the money? Why it is a problem.
It's funny.
For people wanting to people.
It's funny you mention that. And on the topic of podcasts, we had 2 WeatherTech sessions per day. So there was in between, flagging down other stories and such, there was a fair amount of downtime either before the day would get started, Graham, or on Saturday, for example. It was done for us early, so I had free time at the end. So captured a lot of podcasts with a lot of people that would be coming out. One of them was with IMSA's Mark Raffoff, who's been with IMSA for 44 of its 49 years. And he raised a great point on this subject of back in the day when we would come to a Laguna Seca or a Sears Point and the hills were packed during the GTP era and such. For the most part, that was prior to cable TV and ready access of the race on television being made available. So if you loved sports car racing and you wanted to see it, it meant you had to get up off your couch. You didn't have a cell phone because they didn't exist, or you had to, be the president to have one, kind of thing. But if you wanted to enjoy this, it meant buying a ticket, driving however long it took you to get there to see it in person, because the only other option was maybe tape delay by a week, or if not more. But if you liked it, you had to get up to go see it in person. That's why the crowds were especially awesome. The racing was great, but there were no options really to view it for many, many, many years. Today, now granted, the weather was perfect in Sonoma. I cannot remember 3 better days of beautiful blue sky, temperatures in the 60s to 70s, low 70s Fahrenheit. It's just perfection. But, maybe Fox and IMSA Radio and others do too good of a job, so that staying home and watching instead of hopping on a plane or driving over is an option. I don't honestly know. I just know that the quality of the product being put out, Graham, certainly deserves more people in person. I just wish I knew how to get more people there.
It's a fair point. It's a good question. Let's pop across and have a look at my little world with the WEC, if you like. A couple of questions coming up here. Seamus Cunningham asks, when the original LMGTP rules, you've actually got a name for it there, not just car, were written, they were supposed to create cars like the CLR, Mercedes CLR, Porsche 9, GT1 Evo. Those seem like cars built to get around rules. It's kind of strange we're now writing rules to purposely go somewhere similar. Perfectly take your point. You're absolutely right. The CLR, which was the swoopy, mad thing that managed to flip itself multiple times, twice with Mark Webber, once famously with Peter Dunbrek, was indeed a car designed to exploit the rules to the max. I think the point here, though, Seamus, is they're not saying let's recreate a Mercedes SLR. What they're saying is there is one aspect of those cars that they are looking to recreate, and that is the fact that if you looked at a Porsche 911 GT1 98 or 911 GT1 Evo, if you looked at Mercedes CLR, you would immediately be able to tell, as the cultured human beings that we are with petrol running through our veins, that's a Porsche, that's a Mercedes-Benz. That's what they're looking for. Make no mistake, this is all about drawing the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, the factories, back into top-line sports car racing. And by drawing them in, you get their money to spend at the track, not just on their own race program, but in what we would call activations. In other words, what they spend in the paddock, what they spend around the track, what they spend on trackside advertising, what they spend on TV advertising. And they therefore, because they're pushing that, see that there's a reason to invest in a much wider area to push the message that they are there with their biggest, baddest, best in this particular race series or that particular race. So the idea is not to recreate a late 90s GT1 car, but to learn the lessons from some of those cars where you could readily see that they were of a particular manufacturer. I wouldn't actually agree that all of them were, by the way. The Toyota GT1 didn't look like any other Toyota I've seen before or since. It was a fabulous thing. And the Nissan GT1 car of that era looked like more or less anything other than a Nissan, unless you looked at the great big word Nissan written on the side of it. But I think the lesson is, I think, well learned by the ACO and the WEC. I don't disagree in any way with their logic. It's going to be very interesting to see whether or not this can be successful. There's a follow-on question a little further down, by the way, which basically asks, it's Garen Batten. One for me, he says, I guess. Here you go. As things stand right now, here you go. What manufacturers would you predict entering year one of the new car rules at Le Mans and the WEC? Really tough one. My guess, and it is a guess, is just by what we're seeing in front of us, my guess is that Toyota keep telling us, and the people I talk to at Toyota, I do trust. I don't think they're giving us any kind of blind side here. They are in this for the very long run. So unless the rules are a complete basket case, which at the moment, whatever you might read elsewhere or hear elsewhere, they're not. It may not be to everybody's liking, but they're certainly written with a view that they're trying to attract as many different entities as possible, that I think Toyota are more or less shoe in. And that means they stay this year, into next year, into next season, into the season after that, at which point we do see one of the new cars from Toyota. Beyond that, I'm hearing increasingly good noises from the likes of Aston Martin. They are clearly in the realms of deciding what their product range is going to look like in the future. They have an excellent record of investing in high-quality motorsports applications that match those aspirations. In fact, today in the UK, we've heard that Aston Martin's new factory in build at the moment will be the home of their electrification program for their future road cars. What have they got at the moment in terms of prospects for electrifying their efforts in motorsport? Well, nothing. Do I think they're going to go Formula E? Hope not. But I do think that LMP1, which is somewhere they have been before, or whatever replaces it, could well be somewhere that we see Aston Martin. Someone actually asked me privately to judge in a percentage basis where the various prospects might be fairly recently. I think you can put Toyota at 90% plus. I think you could probably at this stage put Aston Martin somewhere around the 70% mark. McLaren, there are two different views of what's going on with McLaren. One is a slightly cynical view. One is a rather more, how can I put this, gentler view of what's going on there with this program. The answer with McLaren is there is active interest in looking to see what those rules actually provide. Is there actually people cutting carbon? No, there is not at the moment. Might there be? I think if there's a compelling commercial case, there might be. There is that great big spectre, though, at McLaren of, at the moment, their primary motorsport program, which across the group, of course, is Formula One, is awful. Make no mistake about it, it's dreadful. The question here is, are the shareholders of McLaren going to sign off a multi-million-pound program that might draw some of their talent in-house onto concentrating on something else if they can't turn around Formula One? I think if you start to see the Formula One supertanker turning at McLaren, you've got a better chance of seeing something in the sports car side. Doesn't mean to say you won't see something elsewhere in prototypes. I do think there's interest in DPI with United Autosports moving forward for not 2019 but 2020, but that doesn't necessarily need terribly much by way of factory interest. Beyond that, yeah, we've all read, seen, understood, misunderstood what's been written about various bodies. We've talked here about Ford, whether or not they're in or out. I don't think we're going to see a Ford LMP1 replacement. Ferrari have certainly been in some of the technical meetings. Not yet clear as to why, but I don't expect to see a factory Ferrari effort. Whether or not they would approve use of a powertrain for somebody else's project remains to be seen. And then beyond that, you've got the other unknown quantities, which are the purely privateers, where they should have commercial availability of a factory powertrain. That should be written into the regulations. And you've got the other unknown quantity, which is the hypercar manufacturers. So people like Glickenhaus, Brabham have expressed an interest, Koenigsegg have expressed an interest. It's all going to be about the detail of those regulations. Can you get to the point where, with a relatively affordable basis, you could have something that looks like the latest Koenigsegg, that looks like a Glickenhaus, that looks like it's going to bolster the efforts of these aspirant and growing niche manufacturers? What do I think is possible? I think it's certainly possible. You might get a number of manufacturers involved in that class that is certainly outwardly impressive. Do I think that they're shoe-in for that? Not yet. They've got a lot to prove, and I think they've got to get very rapidly much better than they currently are about communicating progress here. In particular, progress about where the rule set's going, because in the absence of that, too many people are writing off the effort before these working groups have even produced the outcome. This is a challenge to the rule makers at the ACO, at the WEC, at the FIA. Guys, you've got to start talking about where your successes might be, because in the absence of that, people are saying that you are failing. I don't believe that's yet the case. I don't believe that's a fair reflection of where progress is, but you need to get better and more confident about communicating direction, and it needs to be now.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. It really is. There's a situation which you just perfectly described, Graham, in that have we heard or gotten comfort that big manufacturers are waiting to do big things with this car, hypercar, whatever it is, thing? No. But have we gotten the feeling that some of the smaller, more boutique, some of them newer, as you mentioned, like a Glickenhaus, not a volume constructor of any capacity, but an Aston Martin, well, okay, again, not big, but definitely this is a giant name. There's a lot of the more modest brands that are ripe to jump in and grasp this opportunity. And while they are capable of being more reactive because of their lack of size, it's not going to take, 27 meetings and conference calls and 47 levels of approval. You could have a more direct yes or no with most of those smaller manufacturers. there's still the question of time that needs to be addressed. The ACO and FIA cannot let this just linger on. And B, there also has to be an appropriate amount of engagement. And what I hope, and it's maybe the only thing of any value I can add here, is we know for sure, Graham, that the ACO and FIA hope that they are going to get more Audi and Porsche level spenders, LMP1 level spenders, where it's just, holy cow, we've erected buildings at Le Mans, spent on this, just crazy. Here's all our money, take it, have fun. I know that that's what they're holding out hope for. What I hope is they do not let that desire for huge cash to come in through big manufacturers be the thing that turns off the smaller manufacturers who realistically are going to be the ones to populate that formula most heavily. So there is concern.
I think that's a perfectly weighted point, MP. There's one other thing to say here, which is, and perfectly correct, by the way, that people are asking, where do you think we might be in year one? It's worth adding here that, as with DPI, the theory is that it should be easier for manufacturers to join in subsequent years because because of the restrictions you're going to have on the technology involved in this, specifically here, the restrictions on aero development and the restrictions on the hybrid power and the functionality, the outputs, and for that matter, the weight of those systems, that you shouldn't get to the point that Nissan found themselves in this cul-de-sac of having to do something wacky to try to actually find a way through the Kevlar armor of the established factories in the class. That, as with DPI, if someone did turn up in year two with DPI, as Penske did, that you can pretty rapidly get to the stage where you're not a million billion miles away from the kind of status quo performance envelope. So that is where this does work in terms of potential sustainability not being governed simply by who's there at the dawning of this new era. That in year two, if you've got someone on the string and actually can say, well, look, this is actually working very well for insert name of large manufacturer or insert name of boutique manufacturer, come and play. And theory is that it should be easier, that in fact what you've got underneath what should be a more readily recognizable body is something that's not a spec tub, but has got the potential for somebody to market a chassis in various forms, different manufacturers. Then there's every reason to think that there's, even if year one, let's say it was 3, let's say it was 4, let's say it was 2 manufacturers, for WEC and for the Le Mans 24 Hours, that in year 2 you've got the potential to grow that without having to rewrite your entire rule book. And that's where, unfortunately, they were caught out by the rampant development that we saw in the LMP1 hybrids. It was great while it lasted. It's like one of those fantastic fireworks that you really shouldn't be able to buy for private use, but we do sometimes. You're sitting and watching it, it's fantastic, but when it's done, it's gone. And, you're left with your sparkler. And I think lessons have been learned. I think the process of trying to get together this global rule set could have been better handled. I probably, if unfettered and fed enough lager, would probably say something a bit stronger than that. But I think where they need to learn the lessons of history is not on that front now. I don't think there should be anything other than upfront to say, look, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We're not going to manage to get a global scheme. If actually having DPI, which is something that is designed for the North American national marketplace, and why shouldn't it be? If that's what is good for them, we need this for these commercial reasons. We will therefore divide and we will go down our road. And this is what we want for our WEC and our Le Mans 24 Hours. And if North America wants to come and play, then these are the rules. That is no different to what actually happened when IMSA determined what they were going to do for their sustainable future. It's now time for the WEC to do the same. They need to prove it. They need to prove it quickly.
You said what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and I stopped
Did
hearing. I stopped hearing everything else you said because my mind shot to "Oh Sheila" by Ready for the World, a lovely song from the 1980s. Okay, so we said we were going to stop right about now. It's 1 a.m. where you are. It's 5 p.m. where I am.
Is.
I would say we pick one or two more questions, one or two, maybe just one each, possibly, and use those to set sail on this episode.
Well, before we do, there are dozens of questions we're not going to get to this time. I want to just apologise for that because I know you all spend time to do this, but I hope you appreciate that with the news we've got within the last 24 hours, we wanted to give substantial time for that. It matters to a lot of people, and I'm sure including a lot of the guys and the girls listening to the show. It matters to reflect on those big issues that affect us all. So unfortunately this time we're going to get to proportionately fewer of your questions. I'll pick out a few and see whether or not they carry over for next week as well. But if you do want to ask them again, feel free to do that. We've got to a couple of those this week. So with that apology, MP, where do you want to go?
Well, I'll take one here, which it's asked two different comments, both from James Winnie Jr. and Travis Bender. Thank you for sending these regarding the shoddy start to the America Tire 250 at WeatherTech Raceway, Laguna Seca. James says, Marshall, Laguna Seca's front straight is narrow and concrete lined on both sides. There must be a better way to get a clean start. That incident took a big bite out of the show for the fans by eliminating multiple championship contenders. One driver's mistake should not be able to affect the championship outcome in a big way. Thoughts? And Travis adds something similar. Can we talk about the start of the IMSA race? Certainly looked like the Cadillac brake-checked the field and caused the whole stack-up that ultimately ruined every team's day and perhaps their season. Stewards penalized nobody, ... Correct call, ? James, interesting thing here. You mentioned how it's narrow and concrete-lined. If we step out of sports cars for a minute and go back to the Pocono IndyCar race held on August 19th, we had the same type of incident happen, and the front straight where that took place at Pocono is concrete lined on both sides, I believe, and you could park probably 2 buses sideways across the straight. So whether it is narrow or whether it is seemingly so wide you couldn't hit a thing, people charging the start, farting around by speeding up and brake checking one another, it will cause problems no matter the width of the track that we're at. I know that when I spoke with Roger Penske today, and he offered some kind thoughts about the good Dr. Panoz, he also, on his own, and he was not affected by it at all, but absolutely laid into the drivers for their behavior, not just on the first start, which took out the number 5 Action Express Cadillac, the 66 Ford GT, Nick Tandy's Porsche 911 RSR, and there's one other car that was injured, which I'm forgetting, but also on the subsequent restart after all that mess was cleaned up. We had GTD cars hitting one another and spinning coming out of turn 11. The hood on one of the Acuras was, its skirt was lifted and flipped all the way back. Just genuine stupidity, Graham. And while the questions here are based on the start of the IMSA race last weekend at Monterey, having already mentioned the Pocono IndyCar race where this thing happened, it's not exclusive to any form of the sport. I would offer this, James, and offer this, Travis. One of the things Roger mentioned, which I agreed with, was, hey, do we need to go to something where no passing before you pass the start-finish line is possible? Is that what we need to get folks to understand, that this kind of brake checking and silliness is just not good for the show? Or, especially for in this case, the limited number of folks who showed up to watch. I mean, the first half hour, 40 minutes, whatever it was anecdotally, Graham, it was garbage. It was pure garbage. For anyone just tuning in at home, I imagine they would have ducked out after 20 minutes because they tuned in to watch a race and just saw yellow because everyone was running into each other and we couldn't get the thing started. But I would say this, James, in particular, I hate the fact that Joao Barbosa and Felipe Albuquerque, who went into the race, who were coming towards the green flag, holding second in the prototype championship, earned 0 points because they failed to cross that line, therefore become eligible to earn points. And as a result of finishing not only last in the race in class, but having earned 0 points, they've fallen to, I believe it is 6th in the standings, Graham, and have gone from having a legitimate shot of winning the title to being essentially completely out of it through this one boneheaded move. I've
got a solution to suggest here.
Well, I would
briefly.
I was just going to say whether it is no passing until you cross the start-finish line, beneath that green flag, or everyone is expected to maintain, basically put yourselves on the pit lane speed limiter, whatever that number is, coming to the checkered flag, where the entire field is sitting there and really unable to accelerate forward or backwards. Basically maintain rigid lane discipline and distance discipline to the car in front of you. Something where this kind of ridiculous does not ruin a race for many to start. I'm not trying to overreact, say, we got to change everything that we do, but this is another thing that left unmanaged, left unchecked. We could be seeing cars spinning down the hill, coming to the green at Petit Le Mans, and you name it, unless IMSA wants to say, hey guys, okay, we can do better. Here's some things we're going to ask you to do to help us in that initiative.
I got a suggestion, and the suggestion is this. I think it would be a good idea to have a early morning driver's briefing, 40 minutes, and just leave them there, and maybe put on the TV coverage of the race before somebody comes in and says, yep, that's 40 minutes of your life you're not going to get back, and that's exactly the way the TV audience felt about it. It needs, doesn't it, just to get the message across that I'm not a race driver. I've never have been a race driver. I never will be a race driver, and I have the privilege to talk to these guys and talk to them about their mindset in certain circumstances, and I'm absolutely certain in the case of some of them are team players and some of them it's single-minded, the visor goes down, the blinkers come on. But there is a reality. Think about the issues we've just been talking about and debating that the listeners have been bringing up. And the reality here is this is a fight, not just for a championship, not just for a race win, but for an audience. And if actually the actions of a number of their cohort is affecting that fight, then that needs to be brought to bear by everybody on the whole field. And I don't think it's, out of kilter with the whole purpose of this to be a bit blunt and say, guys, it's not just about your race. It's not just about the championship. It's about whether or not we've got a product that anybody wants to come and buy moving forward. If you want to carry on racing, they could see what you could see and what the listener could see, which is that the crowd wasn't there last weekend. If you want that to improve, you've got to give people a reason to want to come and watch this. And what they don't want to watch is a race under caution. What they don't want to watch is frenzied activity for 3 corners and then another 20 minutes while we sort the field out again. And there's been too much of that. It's not just IMSA. It tends to infect, if you like, world motorsport at the moment. But yeah, when the races are like that, they're very noticeably like that. And because we're used to that ebb and flow, perhaps we don't notice it as much as a TV audience does, or indeed a family deciding where they're going to bring their kids and keep them entertained for an afternoon does, and maybe the lessons need to be learned.
All right, my friend, last question is yours. Take us home.
It's going to be second last, because I've got something I just want to chuck in right at the end. This one comes from John Cox. By the look of it, John is a relatively recent addition to our endurance racing fan numbers. Welcome, John. Indeed, this was before my time as a sports car fan, but legend has it that Audi blew everybody's minds by showing up to Le Mans with a diesel race car running super long stints leading to an epic string of wins. What was the regulatory situation at the time that allowed them to introduce such a radical new idea? It seems like everyone is so tightly controlled nowadays, it would be impossible to flip the script like that. Not quite entirely right on a couple of fronts. It wasn't the diesel car that started that string of wins. That was the epic R8 back at the start of this century, and neither were they allowed to run super long stints. What they were was extremely efficient. I happen to think it was the Audi R10 back in the day that came forward with this turbocharged diesel, the Epic TDI technology. I think that was, in my time, one of the pieces of engineering genius that was brought to bear in any part of world motorsport, and particularly in sports car racing. It was done for various reasons, but one was to change the mind of the car buying public, and in particular the North American car buying public, about the potential for diesel technology. And to a greater or lesser extent, it did exactly that. It was a spectacular piece of engineering, parallel thinking. The reality was they spotted, as have other people, other geniuses in motorsport, spotted a gap in the rule book that allowed them to do exactly that. It was the genesis, by the way, of where we find ourselves today with equivalence of technology. That's where we've got to today in terms of different systems of generating power. So the equivalency of technology at the moment that is causing so much debate in LMP1 started back in those days. Epic programs from Audi. The fact that they chose their full season efforts with the R10 to be in North America was twofold. One was a marketing reason. That's where they felt they had the best opportunity to grow their marketplace as a proportion of the road cars, tiny in America with diesel at that stage compared to over here in Europe, where actually if it didn't become the predominant engine technology, it certainly did pretty darn well at it. And the second thing was, it was a pretty cool series at the time as well. They felt there was better racing, better marketability there in the days before we got into the WEC, where the Le Mans series was a far less big profile series of events. So for me, they spotted what the rule book offered for them. Has racing become more spec? I'm afraid, yes, it has. Have we got more potential quiet genius coming along? I don't think any time soon in sports car racing, because ultimately it's all now about retaining that commercial impact that you need to sustain this thing. I did want to finish with one of the questions that come under our kind of general or fantasy type things. So I'm just trying to find exactly which one it was.
And I was going to throw in quickly, I apologize. This is once committed to memory with perfection, so I've forgotten the team name and I've forgotten the exact year. It might have been 2004, 2005, but there was a team that I believe it was from a VW Touareg V10 turbo diesel road
that was
car.
Taurus. That was Taurus. It was our friend Ian Dawson.
Yes, that yanked one, basically showed up and cracked the turbo diesel door open at Le Mans a couple years before Audi. Audi took that up in 2006 with the R10 TDI. Peugeot followed in 2007 with their 908s. But it wasn't, I don't want to say a loophole. I mean, it wasn't there intentionally. Nobody took it up seriously until Audi decided to. But like many things in motor racing, it often takes a smaller, underfunded, overly ambitious team to say, well, there's no way we're going to beat them in conventional manners, so let's see what the rule book says that we could do that's strange, and maybe help ourselves to get ahead of folks. Didn't happen, obviously, but we have to assume that our friends at Audi and then Peugeot did take notice that someone tried it and probably cracked open the rule book again and say, why have we missed this? Because the timeline from that, if we know that the R10 came online in 2006, obviously they would have been working on that in 2005 to bring to bear.
Let's finish with this one. Comes from another of our Reddit contributors, DC3, excuse me, Dakota. It might be a girl, might be called Dakota. You do let us know. I don't know.
Or a woman.
And it's like one or the other. Both equally as good. It's part of a question, part of a point. And they say, as a fan, passionate about retaining purity in racing, especially in the top class at Le Mans, does not want to see significant component standardization does not want to see DPI-esque mandated manufacturer styling, most certainly does not want to see heavy-handed car-by-car BOP, and no, pretending it's a per technology, not a per car balance doesn't make things okay. So pretty clear there. How can I voice this to the rule makers, who at times seem more anxious to produce exciting YouTube highlight reels than proper motorsport? It's not, in rule makers' terms, a very fashionable viewpoint. But I don't know about you, MP, but there's a big part of that appeals to me.
Yeah, and it sounds like you've got some crazy static, so maybe those at the FIA and ACO overheard this, and they're trying to block the signal. I am in complete agreement, DC3. Complete agreement. I often remind myself that enjoying a race is not a shared thing. And by that I mean the things that I would look to for entertainment to say that was a good race, probably different, maybe in a big manner or maybe just small little slight differences, but what would make me say, oh, it was a great race, I know it's probably a little bit different than the next person. There's some common things. Was there passing? Was there action? Was there some drama? There are some things that are, I would say, normal threads that we can pull on. But for example, and exactly to your point, a team or driver or car that is capable of going to the front and leaving everybody. I don't mean a little bit. I mean gone. I love it. That's great. That is fun for me because that is excellent. That is applied to another form of the sport. It's watching Steph Curry shoot 12 three-pointers in a row or scoring 70 points. A quarterback throwing 6 touchdowns, etc., etc. A huge home run derby. That is just amazing. It is excellence. And so the gap that's being built becomes the thing to look at. Holy cow. Well, how far can this person go? Or this car, how much better is it than the rest? How far ahead will it be at the end of the race? It could be the individual driver performances that I'm looking at saying, hey, the fight for the overall win, okay, that wasn't too great, but I saw Rob Bell do some things in that car he was driving that it defied physics. We all find different points of interest that make us say a race was great. And so I mentioned that whole thing because I think sometimes we get confused with excitement and entertainment. It's got to be close. All the lap times must be within a millionth of a second of each other and pass constantly. It's fun, but it also, to me, would feel like a 2 hour and 40 minute, 6 hour, 12 hour action movie scene where it's just the combatants. It's Matt Damon and Jason Statham and whomever else just in The Rock punching each other and fighting for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And you go, look, I give you 5 minutes. I'll give you 10, maybe 15 total minutes throughout the movie. But good Lord, at some point, if that's all it is,
how many times did you punch that guy in the face?
Yeah. Wow, you have turned into a robot almost with your headset, by the way, mate. So I might have to close this out here. But I'm with you on this, Dakota. I'm with you on. I would love to see less restriction. I would love to see less spec-mindedness. I am not at all averse to cars and or drivers and or teams dominating. If it's the same one over and over again, yeah, of course the season, that theme will get a little bit old. But if we have the ability where different cars, different approaches, different skill sets play out on various tracks, some are completely competitive on, say, tighter circuits. Some have a bigger advantage on longer circuits, etc. That's where I think, things balance out in the end. But I'm with you. Less restriction, less control. Those are the biggest, greatest points in racing that I recall seeing in the GTP era, in the American Le Mans series when it was at its peak. The counter-arguments always, costs get out of control, it's boom or bust. I understand that. But would I rather live my life, Graham, with decades of everything kind of being brown and 50% and good, but never great? Or would I rather at least say, hey, there might have been some really low years, but gosh, I am cherishing those high points. I'm a high point guy, and that doesn't always mean everything is equal and buttoned up and processed to the point where we're manufacturing excitement on every lap.
Well, look, here you go, and hopefully the static isn't
And
too
you're
bad
back.
here.
Hey, all right.
Yay! That's what you get for unplugging something and plugging it back in. I am asking myself the question, am I ever again going to see a Cooper moment that happened in Formula One, a Lotus moment in IndyCar? Are we ever going to see that again? And here's where this great universe of ours comes full circle in, 2.5 hours of this show, which is, are we ever again going to see somebody who steps out of the template and brings forward a front-engine GT1, a front-engine prototype, a hybrid car, a hybrid-powered car, or, indeed, a prototype that completely breaks the template to such a degree that it actually operates outside the rule book? Are we ever going to see that again? And are we ever going to see a person involved in our sport that does all of those things in one short, stellar period in sports car racing? I think that's a nice way to finish it, because all of those things, lest we forget, were done by Dr. Don Panoz.
And with that, and our usual thank you to Cooper Tires for their support in making this podcast possible, and to PNC Bank for the same benevolence in helping to make this possible. Graham, let us say absolute thanks to all of our listeners, the new listeners that come in each week that submit questions or just simply tune in. And also thank you to Caleb, who we are so sorry, son, that you are no longer here with us, and definitely express our sorrow and gratitude to Dr. Don Panoz, who, as you thankfully mentioned, Graham, we wouldn't have a lot of what we have today in North America, I would say even European racing, knowing how Dr. Panoz united a fractured, disconnected North American sports car scene, united it with France, with Le Mans, helped create a true global framework that has built prosperity for so many. All the people who worked for Dr. Panoz have come through, even we're just in the series. Hey, you got to be an official because of him. You got to do catering because of him. Whatever it is. A lot of heavy hearts, and I think there are a lot of people tipping up some shot glasses with Jameson or one of the other drinks that Dr. Panoz enjoyed, because that man, like a Dave Mirage, like a Dan Gurney, like many others who just poured themselves into this sport, Graham, made it great, made it greater, gave us things that we loved watching, things that made us think differently. Holy cow. Whoever knew you could do that until you tried it or were willing to do it and failed, but learned from it and enriched the rest of us on an engineering level, on a creative level. It could be the livery. It could be whatever. You think about someone like Dr. Panoz, who, whether you're brand new to this sport as a fan, or someone who's been around for decades, that man definitely deserves a moment of silence, a moment of respect, because he's earned it, genuinely earned it. Why don't you say farewell for us, my friend?
Good night, everybody. It's not been an easy show, this one, I have to say. These things do always feel very personal, and the fact that we've had so many emails, so many tweets, so many responses to the pieces that MP and I have been working on this evening, just goes to show that we're working alongside and with and for people who do feel, I think, much the same way as we do about the people who are special in this wacky world of sports. If you've got a heavy heart tonight, just think about the happy things that you can apply to the people we're missing tonight. I'll be thinking about them for quite a long time to come. There is more to come with Racer and with Daily Sports Car about Don Panoz and his contribution, including a couple of names that just weren't available to us today to catch up with, who had particular reasons to give their views on the contribution that he actually made. Let's look forward to hopefully happier news for next week's show. For now, though, I'll be raising a glass before bedtime to the good doctor, and I'll be remembering him tonight. Good night.